Let me explain what I mean by that. Okay, let's assume you say, okay, no USBs. But then you realize, oh, we have USB printers now. What do we do with those? We cannot print anymore. So you have to find a practical approach that protects you, but also allows you to continue to do your business. Because one will realize that security is always a balance. And the balance is what I call usability, security. Too much security, nobody can do any work. And not enough security, everything is too relaxed. So you need to find this appropriate balance. So there is technology like allows you to disable USB, but just embarking and putting it across the board may introduce sometimes more problems than it solves. So you have to do it sometimes on a selective basis or user by user basis within the environment. Yes.
Children and others. Ethics and law, these are more policies
That is a good question, actually. Ethics comes actually from many aspects. Ethics comes from the notion of a profession.
Me being a member of now IT for more than 23 years, back in Canada there's an organization called KIPS, which is the equivalent of BITS here in Bahrain. They introduced about 10 years ago something called ISP, it was Information Systems Professional. And being part of that group, you have to subscribe to ethics. Now, ethics, you may think, oh, this is new, but it's not. Doctors have ethics. You know, when you go to a doctor and you give him information about yourself, he preserves that confidential, so he does not go to the next person coming in, oh, you know, this guy just came in. Ethics exists for engineers when they build buildings. My father is luckily enough an engineer, and I learned a lot when I was quite young. One interesting thing, when in Canada you're an engineer, they give you a ring. And this is a ring made out of steel. It's actually a symbolic ring. What this ring was is a ring made out of steel from a bridge that had fallen and had caused a lot of disaster. And by giving that ring to every engineer, what they're saying, when you embrace this profession, you now have the responsibility of building things that are solid and are not going to cause human injury. Now, today in IT field, some of these elements are not 100% there yet. Why? Because we're too much in a hurry. We're in a hurry to build systems, so we sometimes forget about these other elements, ethics, compliance, etc. But it is coming, and it is coming faster. Example, in security, there's something called CISSP. For the people here that happen to be CISSP, although yes, there's an element of knowledge, there's an element of passing the exams, there's an element of practical experience, there's also an element called ethics. And in the ethics session, if you actually see, it clearly states what is allowed as acceptable behavior and what is not allowed as acceptable behavior by being an information security professional. So your point is correct. Ethics, now, this addresses ethics from a professional point of view. You also need to introduce ethics at every user within the organization. This is more about corporate culture. And as I've been in the Middle East now for almost 9 years, I've realized that some organizations are better than others at creating a corporate culture. I've been to companies like SABIC, Aramco, Citibank or Sama, and some of these organizations have been able to find ways to motivate their staff in much more stronger ways than others. And they do it sometimes in a creative way, not just by force, by motivation. Let me give you an interesting scenario from an organization called Citibank. They have a security awareness program, but they don't have just any security awareness program. Every employee, every year, must sign a document saying that they have read the security policy, which is at most 10 to 20 pages, and they understand it and they will oblige by it. That's number one. By doing it every year, it's refreshing. Hey, you have a responsibility, a corporate. The second thing they have quite interesting is what I call a security awareness passport. They give each employee a little passport, which is like 4 pages. And in this passport, there's stamps. And stamps means anytime a user takes a course or a CBT or goes to the intranet to answer a quiz about security awareness, they get a stamp in that passport. Now, what this is trying to introduce is kind of what I call sometimes peer pressure. see, oh, I've done all my security awareness. What about you? It makes of it. So you're introducing a way of people helping each other to make the organization more secure. But it's difficult. It's not easy. And it takes time. It takes new ideas. And the ideas have to be acceptable to the people that use them. You cannot just force something. It's not good enough. Maybe last question, because I think I've heard prayer call, so it's almost time. Go ahead. I'll give you a good example. I was, luckily enough, about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called La face cachée du crédit, which is actually French. It's called The Hidden Face of Consumer Credit. It's a practical information book about banks and credit cards, etc. In credit cards is a good example about risk and acceptable risk. When banks introduce credit cards to their consumers, there's an element of risk, an element of fraud. But you have two choices. You put too much controls and people will not use the credit cards, or you accept or assume a certain level of risk and you get that risk through other mechanisms. You pay for it through the interest rates of the usage of the cards, etc. So what I'm really trying to say is that in a business context, the balance between doing or not doing becomes a business decision. And the business decision means if you put so much security that the users will not use the services you have to provide, you're going to go out of business. So sometimes you have to find what I call acceptable levels of risk. And you simply operate with these acceptable levels of risk. People do this when you drive a car every day. Of course, there's a risk of an accident, but you accept that as an acceptable level of risk, and you take the car every day. Now, you can counterbalance some of these by taking things like insurance, by outsourcing some elements of the risk to other third parties. And then you can introduce other elements, like in the case of credit card, for example, they introduce things like credit card bureaus. So you study behavior of people that do not pay their credit cards. So you find ways of reducing your risk by introducing better information. Same thing in security. You can introduce better mechanisms to inform you about types of attacks. But some organizations have introduced interesting ways. Without naming the organization, let me give you a simple example. Today, when you're about to register for an online service, there's many ways of doing it. One is you go to an online form, you fill it, and then you get it, and you enable, let's say, online banking for query. But this may not be acceptable for the end user. Says, well, what if somebody else tried to impersonate this user and did this online form? Then I'm exposed as a bank. So what some banks have done is they said, well, I'll use a mechanism that I already know and it's proven. So they did a very simple solution. Sometimes the security solutions are not complicated ones. Simply did is everybody already goes to the ATM machine, right? So simply they added one extra choice to the ATM machine. Apply for online service. So when they put in and they do the normal withdrawals of cash, they say, okay, apply. Next time, they receive the application form automatically, so they have now an online service. They can use the same card number they already used. So you're using what I call a trusted mechanism to build trust in relationship between you and the user. And this is what it's all about. Let me give you another example about credit card, because we've known for quite some time. When we introduced ATM cards in Canada quite a few years ago, there's a very, it's an old population, 50, 60 years old. The old people, when they received the first ATM cards, they were afraid of it, because they said, well, what happens now when I use this? Something wrong happened to my account. So anytime they used to withdraw money from the ATM machine, they used to run back into the bank to update their booklet to make sure that the withdrawal actually took place. And then after 1 month, 2 months, they say, okay, the system is trusted. So and then it becomes a way of doing. So as you introduce these new technologies, you have to build a trust relationship between you as a bank and the consumers of the services that you have to provide. Will there be risk? Of course. But you need to counterbalance that risk with the business transactions that you're going to conduct. This is probably a good time to pray, break for prayer call. And the next step will be we'll have lunch served downstairs by the swimming pool. I guess people at the reception there will guide you to the right direction. Okay, you can take one of the two elevators to. Thank you.